everyone. Welcome to this KCrush Features interview with director Jerome Yoo and producer Nach Dudsdeemaytha to talk about their film Mongrels, which has won multiple awards and is now presenting at the Jeonju International Film Festival in Jeonju, Seoul. And I'm so happy to be able to talk to them today. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. Yay!
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks
So Mongrels is a film about a South Korean family who immigrates from South Korea to the prairies of Canada in 1991. And it's about this family. The father, Sonny, he's played so beautifully and interestingly by an actor that I am not familiar with, Kim Jae-yeon. And he's the patriarch of the family. He believes in being strong and being taciturn and being silent, but he also believes in communicating with animals, which I think kind of like creates this juxtaposition of his personalities. And then you have his son, Ha-jun, played by Danu Nam, and his daughter, Hannah, played by Seon Jin. And these three individuals in this family, they're grieving for the loss of their mother and their wife, but I think they're also grieving the loss of their homeland. But that's something that's not discussed verbally with them. But they're talking about their mother. But the more I thought about it, they're talking about their grieving of the loss of their motherland. So I want, first of all, to talk about, for you, Jerome, I'm going to ask you a weird question. I looked at the timeline of this film. So this film is set in 1991, and you were born in 1994. I want to ask you, what was it about this particular timeline that made you decide, I want to set a film about South Korean immigrants to Canada in a time before I was born? You know, you could have set it in like late 90s, early 2000s. What was it about 1991 in particular that made you say, I want to write this immigrant story at this particular time?
I think it was 1991 for me because I took into account the different characters reflect some of it reflects my brother's age, it reflects my age, and then I think I did some, oh gosh, this is a good question because I did some really specific calculation at the time of trying to average out what would be the appropriate timeline. And then I was thinking that maybe if I use my birth year, it felt like it's a little too close. So then this is why I went into it. This was my path. It was like, okay, I should do 1994 because that's just when it makes sense. Or even when I immigrated to Canada. But I remember I took this family's age and the generation that they would probably be most, I think it started, calculating with Sonny's age, and then when you have the kids, and then when this would happen or that would happen, specific events, and then I landed in 1991.
And what year did you immigrate to Canada?
1995.
Oh, okay, so just a year after you were born then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you said you were calculating for Sonny's age and the age to get his kids. Is that influenced by your own parents' age then, when they would have immigrated to Canada?
This is a good question, but
or you didn't even consider them?
I wanted to take myself out of the equation a little bit, but then I remember I was doing some averaging out of my brother's age and my age and I don't know if I took my parents into account, but it was some weird multiplication. And then it was just the fact that oh, I don't want it to be so hey, the director's age is 94 and it's a direct parallel to the director's experiences or stories. It felt a little too meta or kind of corny or something along these lines that made me want to just separate it ever so slightly, but still pay homage to that time of the early 90s.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I asked that was not only just because of your age, but because I think the 90s was a very specific time in global history, because in the 90s, that's when South Korea would have been a relatively new democracy. You know, they got democracy, I believe, in 1985. I could be wrong. I believe 1985. But their transition from post-colonial, post-World War II, post-dictatorship happened very quickly. And their industrialization happened within a very short span of time. They became industrialized within 20 years. And then when they were booming, because they had it was the 1988 Olympics, and that was a big boom for Korea, like they were prospering and like they were getting a lot of recognition on the global stage. And then in the 90s, just as they were hitting their stride, the IMF crisis happened. And a lot of people immigrated from South Korea to North America in the 90s. So that's one of the reasons I asked, because there was a big impetus for a lot of people to move to South Korea in the 90s. But in this film, that was not the reason. It wasn't due to economic hardship. I think it was more due to emotional hardship. I think they were like and because the kids had no say in this, they had no choice but to go along with what Sonny wanted. But Sonny was running. He immigrated because he was running from his grief. And he didn't know how to process his grief in South Korea. So he was like, let me move to a completely different country where my grief didn't happen. So talk to me about that. Talk to me about having this setting this film around a father who's running from grief. Because I think it's really, to me, I think it's beautiful to have an immigrant story not set around a particular globally traumatic event. Because, for a lot of immigrants, especially in the 80s and the 90s, were running from war. Whether it was in the war from the Middle East, in Africa, in other countries that were in Southeast Asia, South Asia. But I love that Sonny's story. His reason for moving was because of something so deeply connected to who they were as a family. It sounds weird to say that, but I like that you actually made this a story about a father running from a situation like that, and he wasn't running from war, for instance.
No, this is one of the parts of the story, or the backstory, that's not so we don't go into it so deeply into the specifics of it, other than simply he moves to Canada because the wife has passed away. And it completely parallels my own family situation, where my father ran away from Seoul also because his father at the time passed away suddenly. So then I moved to Canada before I even got to really know my extended family, because I was only one, and my grandfather had passed away. So in this sort of way, my father, I think he was looking for a new place to begin, not just because his father meant a lot to him. It was a really important part of his upbringing. So it's a mirror of just the personal experiences that our family faced at the time.
Yeah, and I love talking about immigrant stories because I'm an immigrant, and for me, like one of the reasons the reason that I left Barbados to move to Canada was because my sister wanted to go to university here. She wanted to do museum curation, and we're a twin. And our mom was like, if one goes, the other one have to go, right? And I so after 6 months of hemming and hawing and trying to decide, we moved, right? And what made it easier for us to move was our dad lived here in the 80s and the 90s. So we had our Canadian citizenship from then, because there used to be a law that if a parent lived in Canada for a certain amount of years, their children in another country could gain citizenship that way. They've done away with that. They don't do it anymore. They made it harder for people to get citizenship and to become permanent residents. But that was one of the reasons I moved here. So one of the reasons I love to talk about immigrant stories is to show that people move and immigrate for very different reasons. Everyone has their own immigrant story. Every story is beautiful and complicated and complex, but also simple in a way. And I say simple, for a story like this is it's a family struggling with grief. And grief is a universal emotion. It's a situation that we all have unfortunately experienced, the loss of a loved one, whether it's a wife, a mother, a father, a sibling, an aunt, and a grandmother. That's a universal story. So that's why I love a film like this, because the grief is something that everyone can relate to. Feeling lost, whether feeling conflicted, and for the kids, for Hajun he's at this cusp of teenagehood going into young manhood, and he's, I think, also not only grieving his mother, but he's grieving the father that he knew. Because his father, I got the impression his father, who his father is in the film, who Sonny is at that point in time, is not the father he had before. And I feel like he's grieving that. He's grieving this as he's entering into manhood, and he's like, I need you to guide me into being a man, but you're not there. So for both of you, I want you to talk about just how Hajun represents young men who want their fathers to be the fathers and the men they want them to be, but the father isn't being present, isn't being who they want. They're like realizing, the idealism I had of my dad is gone. He's looking at his father with very clear eyes now. He's like, you are not my hero. You are not the Avenger. You're not the person that I can rely on. So can you both talk to that? Nach, you can go first.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I see in Ha-Jun and the struggles that he goes through, not only with himself, but with his family, kind of mirrors a lot of the experiences that, I went through, or colleagues and friends at my age at the time went through as well, because I'm also an immigrant. Maybe not to the same degree. I think there's a lot in Mongrels that is heightened for dramatic purposes, of course. But I think having moved here, having been born in the 90s and being first generation, immigrating to Canada at a very young age in the early 2000s, I think what I see in my father and a lot of the folks in his generation is a transition. How they were brought up and the environments that they were brought up in, the values that they were taught as children are different to what I think I came to learn in North America. So I think that's where we see June struggle with Sunny a lot too, is that Sunny is coming as an adult into this very, very new environment where a lot of the values of the people around him are fundamentally different. And for June, he's a teen, right? Like he's growing up and he's making friends in this new country, and of course he's gonna adopt some of the values that they have. So I think we see a real clash of values there, and that's really I think that's a very, very universal experience for a lot of immigrant families, especially first generation immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think what I've realized growing up is as you grow up and transition into being a young adult, you start to see the flaws in your parents. Some of the more deeper, darker things that they may have struggled with. You realize that they're human too. It's something that I've come to realize with my own parents over time. Some of the things that they tried to hide away from me or protect me from, you see that all this time that they've been struggling behind closed doors. And with Ha-Jun, I think in his case, the father has always been strict, at least in my head. But of course, once grief enters his life, it does change his father in ways that Ha-Jun may have never imagined. He becomes a lot more irrational, and I think at times it's something that I've seen from my own father, where I know deep down that he's a good man because I see that side of him, that he cares for his family, but then also at times he's so he dances to his own mood and things like that, where oftentimes just depending on mood he could be quite irrational. And he and I, we laugh about this even to this day, I think, because as Nach has said, it is very fictionalized, so a lot of people wonder, because they can clearly see it's a very personal film and story to me, that whether my father was really like the way Sunny was, but that's really not the case. I think it's a very, very extreme version. And even after my dad watched the screening in Vancouver, he came up to me and the first thing he said was, I think the dad character is overacting quite a bit. So,
but you see, the thing is I think for us, and this is for our own parents too, a lot of their reactions do seem overreactions to us. Even in hindsight, it may not, but in that moment, it does seem like an overreaction. So as we were saying, Jerome, it's like a hyper realistic version of a reaction that a parent might have. Like you're a teenager going into young adulthood. You want to spend more time out with your friends, and they're telling us to stay inside. And their tone may not be aggressive, but we're reading it as aggressive because we're like, you're stifling my independence. How dare you? And that to them is also just, and then on the flip side of that, our reactions seem like overreactions to them, and because they're like, I'm the parent, you're the child. Why are you arguing with me? And to us, we're like, I'm not arguing. I'm being like, and I've had these, as you can tell, I've had these same situations.
No, that is so relatable.
My own mom.
So relatable. Yeah. It's like, like my parents would just like be yelling at me, and there's like, why are you yelling? Why can't you just talk? And it's like, I'm not yelling. And I'm like, what do you mean? You're literally raising your voice at me.
Yeah, my mom was the same. My mom was like, don't you raise up? I'm like, I'm talking to you in a very civil manner.
Yeah.
But to them, they see, and I always, and if told my mom this, even now as a grown up, I'm like, you raised me to be independent. When I was young, you told me be independent, act grown. And then as soon as I do act grown, as soon as I exert my independence, you're like, how dare you? And the same thing is happening with Hajun and his father. Like Hajun is like, you brought me to this country and I'm trying to get to know the people in the community, but you want to keep me separated from them. So Hajun is like, how am I supposed to survive here if I don't get to know the people here? I can't be isolated from them, but he doesn't understand that his father is looking at the world he's in with very clear eyes, because there is racism, and he understands there's a danger because like, for instance, you got the pastor, like the guy Scott, the father who Sonny works with. He's a pastor. He's a dichotomy, and he made me think a lot of like white plantation owners, really and truly, because like they would be preaching the Bible to enslave Black people while committing the most heinous acts, and the same thing with the settlers on the prairies, not only in Canada, but in America too. They would be preaching from the Bible on Sundays and Sunday morning, and then go hunting down Native Americans and First Nations people, and I kind of liken the mongrel element in the film, because mongrels to us and like everyone is like considered wild dogs. They're like wild mixed breed on trained inbred dogs. And I don't know if it was their intention, but I kind of saw it as how like white people in particular, look as immigrants, as being uncivilized and being different, but also to the Native Indigenous people as being uncivilized, being barbaric, and being untamed and needed to be civilized. And I wanted to ask you about that because I kind of saw that in relation to, yes, Sonny is aggressive. Yes, Sonny is volatile. Yes, his grief is manifesting as anger, but it's also like he is a man who has immigrated to a country with people whose history that he knows, who he knows, like these white, like, in like Pocahontas, like these white people cannot be trusted. And he's like thinking that because he's like, his son sees these people as admirable, but it's like, these people are paying him to hunt dogs. These people are paying him to kill dogs, to be barbaric, to be vicious, to be a killer. But yes, so they want to hold up the idea of being civilized, as being, as being modern, as being like being aspirational. So I wanted to talk to you about that because the film very focuses a lot on dichotomies and contradictions between the characters. So you both can talk about that.
Well, I think you bring up a really just great perspective on, like mongrels, like from the Canadian, especially the Larson family depicted. Like I think they are the type that, well, it's two things. I think there's a generalization of what in the past, the white man might look at immigrants. There is definitely that perception of like, oh, they're uncivilized, they're new to this country, they're uncultured, they need to learn the ways, they're not quite a part of this society, and they're lesser because of it. I think what I try to draw with the Larson family is something that is a little bit more balanced, where we see that there is some generosity given towards the Lee family. There's shelter, there is goodwill being provided, and there are efforts towards acceptance, rather than labeling the Lee family as something not so acceptable. I think they are giving them a hand, but it is more so the fear from Sonny, sort of his unwillingness to accept that helping hand, because I think there's this shift in status. He's not able to communicate with them. He's not able to follow his sort of, how should I say? Like he's not able to follow his like gut feeling, just like he would be able to be in Korea when he is able to actually get to know people by communicating properly with them. So I think in this sort of way, like I try to draw something that's a little bit more balanced. I've seen my father often do this again because so many of these things come from my own experiences where I've seen someone be a good neighbor to us, and my dad would just be suspicious of it, you know, as if they want something back for it, or if we accept their, you know, generosity, like you know, they'll hold us against it later in the future. So I think it is this sort of this fear from the immigrant perspective as well, and because yeah, I just wanted to offer that and put that on the table towards the conversation also, because I have also seen that side happen as well as the other side where it is, you know, just that more stereotypical and often seen perception on screen of just immigrants that are not accepted into society.
Yeah, and I think in very early in the process, we were pretty we were getting into the details of all of that, and I remember having a conversation with Jerome and just kind of looking at you know, racism and you know, oppression as we see it on screen in terms of how immigrant experiences are told, immigrant stories, especially dealing with you know, it's an issue that are still being dealt with today and are still being felt today, but how it's perceived on screen can sometimes feel very you know, pointed in terms of the way that that's depicted. Whereas I think in real life, and what Jerome and I were sharing about our own personal experiences, there are so many little microaggressions that we experience, or like something that may not immediately be perceived as racism, but still has a giant effect on how you view the world and how you view others and how you interact with others around you. So I think that was definitely such a big part of it. Like I don't think, you know, the events that you see in Mongrels, the way that the Larsons are depicted, they're not, you know, they're not intentional in their in the way that they treat outsiders. And I don't think it's, you know, I don't think they're evil by any means, but just that, again, the differences in those values and the way that they do things compared to the way that the Lee family do things, there's definitely inequity there, and we see it a lot from, you know, the Lee family's perspective. And that's something that I think we wanted to try and capture on screen as well. It's a hard thing to try and show, but like there's a feeling there that we wanted to capture on screen, and I think Jerome and I were very conscious about that.
And I think you guys managed it very well, because again, like I always talk about the immigrant experience is very specific. You know, there's a very big, when you move from your home country, the place you grew up, the place you knew people, or even if like for you, like Jerome, you moved as like a toddler, so like 1 year old, but your parents would have immigrated as adults. And when you immigrate as an adult or as a teenager, you already have the impact, the imprint of your home country on you. You know, you have that within you. And when you move to a completely different country, even when you're speaking the same language, I moved to Canada, like I'm Barbadian, so we speak English. English is our first and only official language, and we have our own dialect and everything. But you still feel like an outsider in this new country because it is not yours. You know, you have to learn to adapt, you know, and there's something I always talk about because it's so dear to me. I always talk about the difference between assimilation and integration. And I believe in integration because I see integration as being able to adapt, fitting in, working, you know, making a space, a home for yourself, but not discarding everything of who you were and who you and what you learned, you know, and the people that you knew where you came from. Whereas assimilation is completely integrating yourself and becoming enmeshed and becoming one and discarding everything that was, you know, and becoming, I am the now, and whatever was not good enough. And I want to fit in, so I'm going to like discard that. And I kind of saw like your film kind of teetered very interestingly on in making the delineation between integration and assimilation. And I saw like Sunny as being afraid that Hajun was assimilating rather than integrating, you know, because like Hajun, yes, he's hanging around with their friends. And I don't think it's necessarily that he didn't want Hajun to have friends. he wanted Hajun to be very wary and be street smart and be careful of who these people are, because he does know you're an Asian young man. Whether the Lawsons may welcome you, but that doesn't mean that everyone around them welcomes you, you know? And so like he wanted Hajun to be aware of that, but he didn't know how to express that, you know? And and instead of speaking about it, he resorted to like control. And he did this thing that I hate that parents do, and I hate that people do, where they're like, if you don't like it, get out. They use banishment as a threat and as a punishment. And I want us to talk about that, because the thing is, banishment is forced expulsion, is forced immigration. When you think about it, it's telling the person you can't belong in this home, so you must get out. You must go become an immigrant somewhere else, technically. Whereas for us, for immigration, is like a choice, you know? And so like, I thought it was interesting, and it was just, I wanted to fight Sunny in that moment, because I'm like, how dare your son left his home in South Korea with you, and now you're threatening him with expulsion from your home, from the second home that he knows, to go out into this world that you're warning him against. You're telling him, be careful, but you're saying, you know what, you can buy my rules, go. And I'm like, so talk to me about that, because I was ready to fight Sunny in that scene, because it was like, how dare you, Sunny, how dare you?
I think empathy and sensitivity towards children is just, you know, it's like you know, it's just so different culturally. Like you said, like for my father and my mother, who immigrated to Canada at the time, like they're Korean, you know, and like their whole life is imprinted, how like they were raised as children is imprinted within them. And just the fact is, you know, when they were growing up, you know, my grandparents used force on them, you know, like would use their hand on them, like so all these things are kind of like ingrained within them, of just like, oh, like this is okay. Maybe at some point, like they had the maybe they're able to, you know, think that, oh, like maybe it's better not to, you know, like scream at my children, or like, you know, like as you said, like, you know, kick them out. Like I remember like my mom was telling me a story where like she was just arguing with her sister, and like there was a big tree in like the backyard where in her home in Korea, and like my grandmother would tie them up onto that tree overnight, you know, and then just like tell them to like get out in that way. But it like sounds so crazy, right? It's like two little girls that are like, you know, like 8 years old, like 9 years old, that are tied up on a tree overnight just because they were having an argument, for them to like figure out. Like I'm just talking, like it can be so extreme, and just I find that there's no sensitivity or empathy towards how parents like treat their children. Like I was saying earlier, like my dad, he's just so mood based, you know. It depends on his mood. There's no like rhyme or reason or logic behind what he says to me or how he treats me. You know, if I come to him with sort of a kindness, and like I'm really gentle and subservient to him, then he's like a little bit more lenient, versus if I face him head on, like, you know, it'll be very much like, you know, who do you think you are? You're a child. I'm the adult. Get out. You know, this is what they resort to. And I just want to say, like, even with that relationship with Sunny and Hajun on the film, I think another layer to that makes it even more complex is, like, you know, he feels ownership over Hajun, and whatever he decides is his perspective needs to be reflected in Hajun, right? So then it's, you know, not about like this idea and sensitivity towards like, oh yeah, like Hajun can have friends here, like, you know, it'll be okay. It's just like, no, I don't like this family, I don't like this place, so you better not like it too. It's this sort of like mentality, you know. It's so like 1 + 1 = like 2, rather than it's just it's irrational. I just keep going back to the word irrational, because there's a lot of irony and there's a lot of hypocrisy within Sunny's actions towards his children. And, you know, I think it's just I think it's how should I say? I think it's all just part of the condition of like the grief that he's going through. It makes all his emotions so messy and tangled up that you know, even if he wasn't grieving, maybe he would act irrationally. But now it's just to an extreme level. And yeah, like I wonder, like sometimes, like, you know, when I screen to a certain audiences from different backgrounds, I find that they have different reactions to how they resonate with Sunny's character. Some people understand this sort of nonsensical, like illogical complexity. Some people like don't, where, you know, just the way that the children are being treated is just, you know, they just can't seem to understand why he would be so mean and bullying his children like, yeah, the way he does.
I'd be interested to know the demographics because I'm, as I said, I'm from Barbados, so I'm from the Caribbean, but like there's something that we used to hear a lot as kids back then. Like parents would say, I brought you into this world, I can take you out, you know, and they say that as a, not only as a threat, but it's a way as we were use the word ownership. And that's what it was, you know, and it's like parents have this idea that because they are your parents, that you have to do everything they say without question. You know, you must not talk back. You must not you must be deferent. You know, you must accept their edicts, accept what they tell you as edicts. You know, they're like monarchs in their own kingdoms. Because, you know, if you say a man is the king of his own castle, I'm like, well, yeah, because we treat everyone in your house as a servant, you know, as a peasant. But but that's kind of how it is, you know, and that's another thing that a lot of people, for a lot of immigrants, have to adjust to is not only are you moving from a different country to another one, but you're moving to a different culture, a different way of being. And then I think for your film, like we talked at the beginning about time periods, and that's another thing. Like Sunny is immigrating to a completely new time period as well. You know, he's moving from a place where being more aggressive as a parent publicly, I'll make the distinction, publicly is more acceptable than to a place where being a parent, being aggressive in public is not acceptable, because we don't know how these people are in their homes, you know, but they project a facade of progressivism. They don't believe in corporal punishment and that kind of stuff, but they're abusive in other ways, you know. And so like he immigrated to a completely different time period, and his son is adjusting to that faster than he can, you know. And someone else who's adjusting faster is the daughter Hannah, and she is adjusting faster because she's a child, but she's looking for something and she's latching on to this thing, and this thing is the Mrs. Lawson. And I want us to talk now about Hannah, because she's a very interesting little girl in that she doesn't know her mother's died. She believes her mother is somewhere. She doesn't know where, but she just believes that her mother is somewhere waiting to come to them. And she latches on to Mrs. Lawson. And I saw in Mrs. Lawson what Sunny was warning Hajun about. Because I saw a woman who saw this little girl and she's like, I'm going to make you into my Barbie doll. I'm going to make you into this thing that I want you to be, you know, to be perfect, to be Christian, to accept my traditions, my values, my way of being, without even getting to know who you are as a person, without getting to know who Hannah was as a little girl. And, you know, and Hannah doesn't speak English fluently, so she has no idea all the things this woman is telling her. But hey, Mrs. Lawson, I saw you are a succubus, and you need to stay away from this little girl. And so, like, I saw it. This might be just me as a Black woman, but from like the moment she started talking about pulling out that box of dye, I was like, run, Hannah, run. This is like, you know, the film Single White Female. That's what that made me think of. So I want you both to talk about Hannah and just casting, because I was reading in another interview that this is the actresses saying her very first performance role. She's never acted before. She's not trained or anything. But like, she's so great in this because it's very hard for children to hold their own against grown adults in a scene. And she, in every scene with everyone who's older than her, she's the youngest cast member. She holds her own, you know. She's the one you pay attention to, like the scene in the bathroom with Hajun. She's the one you focus on. She commands that scene. So, and again, in the forest at the end, that's who you pay attention to. So talk to me about Hannah and like just finding Sane and working with her.
We were very fortunate and lucky that we found Stain Jin, who plays the role of Hannah. We had done a countrywide search, you know, for actors, but you know, like I'm quite familiar with like the acting talent who's Korean speaking across Canada, and the search I knew it would come up empty, so I knew that I would have to resort to street casting. We were street casting, and again, I think I already like knew in the back of my mind that I'd be working with someone without experience, and it turned out to be the case. Of course, was saying how we found her was her father actually had submitted for the role of Sunny, and that being a non-professional actor, submitted a photo, like a family photo, and I remember at the time that. We were just about to cast and lock in the role of Sunny over abroad in Korea. So then gently we were just letting him down, but then we were also like, who is that girl, little girl that you're in your photo, and would she be interested in maybe auditioning for the part? And well, the video that they sent in was not even the audition video because we tried to get like the girls that audition to read the dialogue and like do the scene as a professional actors would with their auditions, but Sane and her family not knowing how to really do that instead sent in a video of her doing taekwondo, and I just saw this kind of fearlessness in front of the camera from Sane from the very get-go, and even in like on an iPhone video, she had such immense presence on screen. And I think maybe Carolyn, that's what you might be reacting to is just beyond her performance ability, whether she does a great job or not, or I think she just has such great stage like just presence on camera that she really becomes a focus and highlight of many of the scenes that she's in. I also have to say that Sane is, despite her lack of experience, it was straight up just her first film project ever. She had not acted before. She's, done art-related activities like dance and again like taekwondo and sports and things like this. But the maturity that she had for a child of her age, I believe Sane was 8 years old at the time we were working with her, and just being able to act in front of camera, like act in front of the crew, like being a professional on set, including like her lovely parents. It was just such a. I just think she's such a talent, and just such a beautiful, soft, tender, caring human being. Inside as well, because she'd always be concerned about the crew and the people around her as well. So that's the type of person Sane is, and I think just really, really, like really, really exactly how I imagined the character of Hannah to be. A bit aloof and in her imaginations and dreams. She's, like seeking her mother wherever she might be, and depending on this one sort of saying that her mother had told her when she was younger, that if you see 100 airplanes flying by and catch, 100 airplanes, then you can make a wish. In the back of my mind, it was, I think, after I finished the movie, it almost made me wonder watching Sane's performance, does she, is she, does she really not know that the mother has passed away? Or does that, truth exist in the back of her mind and she's just unwilling to face it? And, I think it was quite amazing that I came to realize that even within the film and the story, like the character of Hannah might have already realized it, despite Sunny not talking about it. It was a realization I had afterwards, and I thought it was quite beautiful.
And Nach, as a producer, what was it like working with Sane and getting the cast together? Because I looked up like the IMDb and I could not find anything on them. But again, in the same interview, I read that for the actor who does play Sunny, Kim Jae-yeon, he again is a veteran actor, but he hadn't worked for years. So what was it like for you going just like working with Jerome and the casting director and like finding these virtually unknown actors, but then realizing these are who we want? Because one of the things I love about independent films is that it gives like actors who aren't professional, people who've never acted, not only a chance to be actors, but it also gives us, the audience, and the chance to see the characters. Because sometimes when you cast like known actors, sometimes it's very hard to separate the actor from the character because all you're seeing is the actor. But for a lot of, one of the reasons I love independent cinema and films like this, where you cast people that aren't well known, is that it gives us time to be and it gives us a way to be completely invested in these characters and just see them and see the story being told. So what was it like for you as producer and like just helping to facilitate all of this?
I mean, I have to give props to Jerome too, because he spearheaded a lot of that process, being Korean and being from Seoul and speaking the language. There's a lot there that's, that we talk a lot about authenticity, especially for the core family. They anchor the film. They're the core of the story. We see the events of the film through their eyes. So it was really, really important to us to make sure that they were the right fit for the roles. And as Jerome was saying, we did a Canada-wide search, and on the production side, there's obviously other challenges too, with it being such a micro budget film that we had to work with. We didn't have a lot of resources, so we had the help of a great casting director in Vancouver and in Korea as well. But a lot of that also fell on Jerome's shoulders, and like really just being on the grounds and doing street casting and making sure that they kind of are the family that is on the page. So a lot of the processes were unconventional, like Jerome said, but saying it was, casted through like just looking at this photo that happened to come across our table. And we're very, very fortunate that, all of these actors, although they may not be as known, were total professionals and knocked it out of the park. And I think, really brought these characters to life. Sane especially, my goodness, like there's so many, I mean, there's so much that's been said already, but there's so many, complexities with this this character, and we end the film on her, like the resolution of the film, we kind of come to it through Sane's experience, or through Hannah's experience as well, and just Sane's ability to do that was, it was a joy to watch, her work with the rest of the cast and with Jerome every day on set. But yeah, I think at the core of it, it was just about authenticity. It was really about, we want these characters to feel as real as possible, and just tried everything in our ability to make sure that happened.
And in speaking about like casting people who are unknown, I was looking again at the IMDb for the crew, and I noticed for the composers, one of them, so like you have two composers, so you have Shea Hao Ting and Yoo Tae-young. And in looking at Yoo Tae-young's IMDb, this is his first project. And I wanted to ask you about working with composers who had never really worked with a film before, and I wanted to ask if it had to do with the fact that because this film, I think, focuses a lot on South Korean culture and Korean culture in general, because like one of the first things we see in the film is Sunny holding the urn that holds his wife's ashes, and his friend brings him a traditional Korean, I can't remember the correct term for it, but it's one of those, it's a small cupboard, and it has mother of pearl, which is inlays in it. And that's a very traditional Korean wood piece. And then also, then we see them performing the Jesa, which is the ancestral rites, and I thought that was interesting, because I was, as you were saying, Jerome, it made me think like, does Hannah in the back of her mind know that her mom died? But I was wondering, does she think that does she even know what a Jesa even really is? And does she know that she's performing the Jesa for her mother? Does she just think that this is just a ritual, but doesn't really know it's a ritual for someone who has passed?
Well, she says, sorry, she's like, oh, like, can I have the apple now? No, like,
right. I was like, when she has to eat apple, I was like, this little girl does. I'm like, does she know what this is? Like, you're asking to eat your ancestors' food. I'm like,
no, but it's so funny, like you say that, because like, I did Jesa all the time growing up, especially my first memories of it in Canada is with the Jesa ceremony. I'm like, what are we doing this for? Like, what do we keep? Like, I had no idea. That's my point. I really didn't know or understand or comprehend exactly why it is I'm participating in this sort of ritual. So I imagine that same with Hannah. Yeah.
She didn't know. So like, and then like other elements, traditional elements you have in the film is like, in the scene where I was like, Mrs. Lost was acting like single white lady, like being all, I was like, lady, cross. Hannah is wearing a traditional dress, and it's a dress that would typically be worn for festivals, like around Chuseok, and then, but there's that, but then they're in the composition of the score. Now there's a lot of traditional elements of Korean music. You have a little bit of samurai playing. You have like the percussion instruments, like the drums, and then we see Hannah playing the pidi, which is a small flute. And that scene kind of made me think of like the Pied Piper, because she's leading the dogs through the forest, and I'm like, the Pied Piper did not end well for the children, but like things ended well for Hannah, thank God, and for the dogs. But I wanted to talk just about, again, in talking about the unknown, in presenting traditional South Korean elements and traditions into the film, but in the score in particular, because I think the score for the film is beautiful. So in seeing that, like one of the composers is a composer who this is his first film. What was the search like finding a composer for the film? Because you needed a composer who knows South Korean instruments, right? And knows South Korean music.
Yes. I remember I went to a friend who made a short film about Korea, Christina Yoon, and just because her story was so specific to her life as well, I approached her to ask for her composer's name, because I thought the music in that short film was beautiful, and I was surprised to hear that Jude, who is the composer, is actually Taiwanese and not Korean. So then I proceeded to actually interview him without like knowing too much, other than just that he composed Christina's short film. And to my surprise, he was saying, "Oh, like my wife is also a composer, and she's Korean, and also has a deep sort of a history with traditional Korean music." And it was just like so funny, because like it just like felt very like, it felt like fate. Like there's this like very specific like type of composer that I'm looking for, someone that definitely needs to be well versed with traditional Korean instruments and music. And my initial disappointment of like, oh, like Jude's not Korean, he's Taiwanese, and then for him to say like, actually, but like my wife is also a composer, and she has like this background in traditional Korean instruments. So I said, would you maybe be open to interviewing and working together then? And that's kind of how we decided to weave through this project together and approach it, is that Taeyang would handle most of like the traditional instruments, just to keep it as authentic as possible. It was interesting when you briefly spoke about Jeonju a bit earlier before our recorded call, about how they were doing a fusion sort of music. You were saying like they're mixing an EDM with the traditional instruments, and there was a lot of this sort of experimentation on our part of how we can, change the sounds of like not the instruments, but sort of like the music, to give it some more like contemporary layers and things like this, just to see how else we can elevate like the traditional sounds of traditional Korean music. But in the way that I found my composers, it was very much just a stroke of luck, in that I first met Jude, and Taeyang just happened to be his partner.
And Nach, I wanted to ask you, as a producer, I'm always curious, like, what is the very first official step you take as a producer for a project like this? Because you have your budget, you don't have your cast yet, but you have your budget, you know where the story is going to be filmed and everything. What is the first official step you take? Like, what is the first thing that you do?
I mean, I have an answer on what I would do now, but at the time, thinking about when Mongrels was made. So for context, Mongrels was made through Telefilm's Talent to Watch program, which at the time was, and still is, a program that's very, very active today. It's a program that's made to foster the creation of the director and producer's first feature film. So for me and Jerome both, this was our first feature. We've done shorts, we've collaborated on shorts together in the years leading up to Mongrels, and so neither of us really knew how to make a feature film at the time of application for Mongrels. And we were it was like what 2019, 2020 at the time, so COVID was just around the corner, and that added an extra layer to the complexity of getting this off the ground. So I asked the same question myself to many other producers around me. What do you do in when you make a feature? What is your first step? And everyone, of course, has a different approach to feature filmmaking. At the time, I was just kind of thinking, oh, like I don't really know what it's going to be like. I've never worked on a feature even, so I was like, I'm not sure what it's actually going to take. It's probably just going to be similar to a short, but you do it for 18, 20 days instead of 3. Easy enough. So we were just kind of trying to do it the way that we knew how, and with shorts that was just getting your trusted collaborators together and just breaking it down to bite-sized pieces and doing it that way. And to a degree, that's what ended up happening on Mongrels. Like a lot of it just relied on so much help from our close collaborators and just asking a lot of favors and asking for a lot of guidance from other folks who have been through the ringer before. So yeah, it was a particularly unique experience because we had nothing in our list of past experiences to really compare it to. It was a first for both of us, and we were just trying to navigate it the best way possible. A lot of lessons were learned for sure. So now I think I think we came through it with an amazing cast and crew who made the project really special. But at the same time, I know that Jerome and I both we took a lot of we took it as a learning opportunity as well. And now I think we both approach new projects with more foresight and just a look into 3-4 weeks ahead and what's in store for us. I think we were very much like working day to day, week to week, leading up to the shoot of Mongrels.
So now that you had your lesson and you've learned it, what is the first? You said now you have your answer. Now, what is the answer you would give now?
I think every time I get a new project across my table, I always ask for the script. I read it a few times, and I always talk through it with an AD. That because that determines budget, and budget is everything. Like it determines kind of what you're able to pull off. It determines what you're able to achieve and where and with who. Which really is the foundation of a project. Reading through Mongrels the first time, just to give an example, of course, you've now seen the film, and there's dogs, there's many dogs running through the shots. There's working with minors. There's, there at a certain point, there was a fire in the script. There's people in the water, there's stunts, and just coming from a short film background, we're like, oh, anything's possible. Yeah, we'll figure that out. And then when you start thinking through the true logistics and linking everything to each other in terms of how achievable everything is, it starts to really become okay, how do we do this creatively? What is the solve that we have for these things? Because everything now comes with the price tag and a time consideration and all of those things, right? Like things that you don't really are not that big of an issue when your shoot is really the 3 or 4 days on a short film. So I think that was definitely the big lesson there was, okay, how do we have this giant puzzle that we now have to put together. There's so many challenging elements that we have to incorporate into this shoot. What is the best way to do it? Can we even do it? And I think for Mongrels, the things we were able to do with the budget and time that we had, I think were, incredible feats. And that's thanks to our amazing cast and crew. But I think me today, if I would have received Mongrels as a script and read through it, I would have been a lot more proactive in, solving a lot of the asks of the script and demands of the script before deciding on a shooting schedule.
Yeah, that makes sense. And because you just use the analogy of a puzzle, and in thinking about it, for everyone attacks a puzzle differently. Some people start with the end pieces, Some people start
Precisely, yeah.
with the centerpieces. Like for me, whenever I do a puzzle, I actually look for specific colors, and I put puzzles together based on color, and then I build it out from there. You know, some people like might start from the middle pieces, and like eventually you have to form the whole puzzle, right? And but it is tricky because like each story requires something different. Like you said, like if you have dolls, I imagine like one of the biggest considerations is not only getting dogs, but you have to get dogs that are comfortable around other dogs. Because I noticed, like, which I thought was interesting, you have so many different breeds of dogs, you know, and like different breeds of dogs have very different characteristics, you know, and like they have different requirements with regards to like, if you have a dog who's a hunting dog, you might not necessarily want to pair them with a Labrador, because Labradors are much more, they're like water dogs. But if you put a Labrador with a dog that is like sight oriented, like a sight hunter, and you put them in the forest, if they see a squirrel, they might take off and chase the squirrel. And so you got to take all of these different considerations, but you also got to make sure that your cast is comfortable with dogs, you know, and like, and so like your film really made me think about like, there's so many different ways that a film can be put together, you know, like so many different puzzle pieces. And speaking about puzzle pieces and colors, the cinematography in this film is very interesting. So the cinematographer is Jerome Lim. And what I thought was interesting is, there's moments where the colors are very saturated, and then there's moments where the is very desaturated, and like the saturated elements kind of made me think of very surrealist fairy tale elements, you know, like I kind of like saw, like as I said, I saw the scene with Hannah, then kind of like the Pied Piper, you know. And I love a vampire film, and like one of my favorite films is Underworld. And Underworld is known for its like intense whites and blues and blacks. And like there's a scene with Ha-jun that takes place at night under the full moon. And I wanted to ask you about that scene in particular, because the film is kind of separated into 3 chapters. So like each chapter is about each character. So like God is Sunny, and like the chapter being named God kind of makes sense because he is kind of like the god of his home, like the king of his castle. But he's also questioning God. He's questioning his purpose in Canada. He's questioning like why is my wife taken? What do I do as a parent? And then he's talking about like nature, how he is a god of nature, like because you know he says like as a human I have dominion over these animals and all of that. And then blonde is of course for Hannah, and blonde is a single white female, and like this lady trying to turn her into this Barbie doll, and like Hannah trying to figure out, do I want to be this Barbie doll? Do I want to be her replacement daughter? Do I want her as my replacement mother? You know, but for Cowboy, I was trying to figure, why is this one cowboy? But then I thought like your film kind of like has some kind of like Western elements, because there's a lot of scenes with like the camera moving through the grass, you know, and the open plains. And then the scene at nighttime, and kind of made me think of how in a lot of older Westerns in particular, there's a lot of scenes that take place at night where the cowboy is sitting, looking over the valley, contemplating his place in life, and like like contemplating like, what does it mean to be a cowboy, being all introspective. And I saw that scene as kind of synonymous with that. So I want both of you now to talk about how you see the film and like the different scenes and elements in the film that really stick out to you in particular. Because that scene with Ha-jun really stuck with me, because I'm like, it's kind of like a cowboy here having his existential moment about like living under the full moon, and like what does the moon symbolize, which I thought was interesting for a young male character to have such an existential scene. And I love that he's given that moment to be very deep and introspective.
I think that scene speaks to how sensitive of a boy Ha-jun truly is, despite what his father wishes him to be. His masculinity and just the idea of like what a man is constantly challenged, right? And I think to me, like that scene, it's the most open and vulnerable showing of who June is, where throughout like his chapter, like I think you could maybe even see him like take on the role of his the mother, you know, for Hannah, acting as kind of like this buffer from shielding Hannah from Sunny as well, who I think in Sunny's eyes, he really doesn't try to interact with Hannah much, because he just doesn't know what to do with her. Like if he touches her, then maybe she'll just break and fall apart. Where, you know, with June, he knows it's a bit different. But just going back to like cowboy, I think it's the symbolic like idea of what a cowboy is, sort of this, brave man that's like, kind of like traveling like the West, like looking for, seeking out something, whatever it may be. I think there's actually a deleted scene in the film of where June, who is quite good at English compared to the rest of his family, uh, he's supposed to have like picked up his English from watching a bunch of movies during his time like in Korea. So then part of the movies that he watches are a lot of like cowboy movies. So I think it's sort of like his idea of what a man should be, whether he is a cowboy or not. Like um, it's never told, but I think in that way, like that's why the chapter is titled "The Cowboy."
Hmm. And for you both, like, which is the scene or which part of the film is the one that you think really stayed with you from the film?
I feel like my answer changes every time I watch it. So I have to think real hard, and it's probably going to change again after watching it at Jeonju. Hmm. I think for the longest time it's been there's been two things that really gets to me is the ending montage of the birthday party that we have for Hana, and there's just something about that scene and how each character kind of comes to realize their flaws, uh that gets to me. um but I think lately I've been I've found myself kind of gravitating towards just the scenes of June and Hannah like brushing their teeth in the mirror and just getting ready for the day. And there's something about that I think captures the sibling relationship so well. And I really appreciate that. I have a younger brother as well, and small moments like that I just really love seeing on screen because it just it makes me very nostalgic for that time in my life, and just there's something about it that feels so real and so personal that I just really enjoy seeing it on screen.
Mm.
Yeah, echoing Natch, like I think one sort of one very intimate scene just that shows like the sibling like relationship is the very beginning opening of the June's chapter where he's like clipping Hannah's like nails with a nail clipper, and that's just something that my mother used to do for me as a child, and I thought that it was quite poetic that he's the one doing it for Hannah with the mother's absence, and it captures something that I haven't personally seen on screen in cinema of just this relationship that I share with my own mother, something that's just very a tender moment that's still deeply seated in my memories. But another reflection of that is the end of June's chapter, where there's this sort of big moment with Sunny, without having to spoil it. But there's a bit of a clash between them, and to see grief put out into the open, aired out in that way between two grown men. It's a moment that I could so clearly visualize from even the scripting stage that transited so well into the final version that no matter how many times I've watched the film, it seems that scene always stirs something within me emotionally.
Yeah, because that's the scene that really does let us know that these are two men who are facing the exact same emotion, but they haven't been able to talk about it before. And this
That's
is
right.
and that it like they both know they're grieving, but they don't talk about the grief. And like they talk about everything else around it, but they don't talk about it till it has to you have to confront it. And I think that's like the change not only for the two of them, but for Hannah, but because they weren't confronting their grief, it left Hannah out in the cold, you know, because she's lost, she's eight, she has no one to really talk about her mom. And like she says, like, you've forgotten her, like, I'm all alone. And she's like, what am I supposed to do if you two can't get your ish together? What am I supposed to do, you know? And like where I had June, like, I have an older brother, or I have a twin sister, but our brother's 10 years older. And like he like I've had my brother tell me the same thing, like, you're immature, you need to grow up. And I wanted her to say, but I am a child. Why do you like, you know? But like that shows like for these characters, that grief really is the thing that they need to confront. That is the dog. That's the dog that's howling and growling. Again, props to your sound designer, by the way, for that. Like the way how like they put like the growls and the that kind of like sinister element, and like it kind of like, grief is the mongrel. Grief is the dog that's howling and gnashing its teeth, right? But we'll wrap up now. But so the last thing I want to ask you both now is like, what is it going to be like for you to finally show Mongrels in South Korea? Because it's going to be showing at Jeonju, and for you, Jerome, and like you cast the actor who plays Sunny in Seoul. So is he going to be at Jeonju? Is he going to be there with you?
Yeah, so Jaehyun Kim, who plays the role of Sunny, will be there, as well as Danu Nam, who plays the role of June. They'll both be there.
Oh, okay.
Because they're both cast in Korea. So Danu was with us for the Vancouver premiere. However, Jaehyun, he hasn't been able to enjoy a festival with us yet. So I'm sure he's really looking forward to it. What it means to be premiering at Jeonju, like to be honest, I think it's quite terrifying to show something so honest and personal to the Korean audience. Because for me, all my life, I've been an outsider and I've always wanted to be accepted. So to see this sort of a Canadian perspective of a Korean family, of an immigrant family, you know, one could say that I don't have that exact experience. I'm just trying to draw and paint like my parents' experiences. And, you know, oftentimes in the past, I think some of like the dialogue and the language was maybe like not as fluent for the Korean audiences with some of my short works. So it's always been this thing of like me wanting to be accepted by my own people, you know, my motherland. So to show something so personal and for it to be kind of judged and, you know, it's just, yeah, like the Korean audience has always been the scariest audience to me. So I'm excited, anxious to meet with them.
And for you, Nash, like,
I mean, I'm mostly, mostly just excited. I think one of my, favorite parts of any film is just being able to show it to an audience and be there and engage with them and kind of be in the room and discuss it and talk through it. Like it's I think it's kind of, why we make films, and any opportunity to do that is something that I really, really love. And to be able to show it to one of our really core demographics is something that I really, really look forward to, especially because it'll also be the first time that some of our casts, get to see it on screen and celebrate their work. Yeah, I'm excited.
I wish I could be there, but while I am not Korean, what I can tell you is from my time being at Jeonju twice, their audiences are very smart, and they ask like really deep and introspective questions. So just prepare yourself for that, and I think they'll love a film like this because one thing what I've done that I've made sure of when I go there, not only just to watch like South Korean films and films from across Asia, but I have always made it a point to watch at least one other international film there. And they do love films showing the South Korean perspective from a different angle, because I think it's important to show South Koreans what it is like being an immigrant, because people have this idea of what living in North America is like. They have this very idealistic perception of North America, of Canada and the US. And like when you explain to them what it's like, sometimes they're like, really understand. And again, and that's not just in South Korea, that's just in general. People who are immigrants can't conceptualize what really being an immigrant is like and what that entails emotionally in particular. And because I think Mongrels does talk a lot about the emotional toll of being an immigrant, I think you're going to have a very interesting bunch of Q&As and discussions while you're there. So I wish I could be there, but I'm so happy for all of you to be there. Like a terrific film, honestly. Like the cast, again, like knowing that most of them aren't like our first time actors, like you guys did an amazing job casting them and like getting them. So like congrats to you and the casting crew and everyone. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.